would be that in the spirit of the startup world, I decided the idea of my presentation, and then I started to validate it. And after doing some validation, I found that it would probably be better to start with a general overview and take it from there. So I will be less focused on capital inclusion. As I mentioned, my name is Lisa. I lead partnerships at Stellar. And I've been with the company about 2 years, and we're based in San Francisco. All right. So Stellar, a digital ledger for trading, a global ledger for trading digital assets. So, that's what I'm going to be talking about today, how Stellar is utilized for digitizing different types of financial assets and trading them. If you've been following Stellar over the years, this may sound a little different from how we used to describe ourselves. When I joined, Stellar was very focused on enabling payments. And so that was a core use case for us. But we've had to adapt, or we've been lucky enough to adapt as the market has started utilizing Stellar for different types of use cases. And that's required us to kind of get a bit more of a, let's say, abstract or fundamental definition of what Stellar does. And so this seems like it's kind of directionally moving that way. We're really great at digitizing any type of asset and enabling trade and exchange between them. So to kind of start off with a few top points about Stellar, first, we're a public ledger. So to be a validator or to have an account inside of Stellar, you do not need any permission. It's open. And typically, institutions integrate onto the Stellar network in order to transact with others. Of course, an individual user can go to the ledger, have an account, hold Lumens, transact, but we find that in most cases, users are using an application provider, a wallet, financial services, platform, et cetera, to use Stellar to transact. So just quickly to mention, I think I already spoke on this some, but the ledger is free and public, so you don't need any permission to use it. And it's governed by the Stellar Development Foundation, a nonprofit based in San Francisco. And the foundation really has 3 core mandates. One is to contribute to the open source code. So we do a lot of development, particularly around Stellar Core. We also try to expand the network and particularly focus on education and making sure that we're representing Stellar as an opportunity everywhere in the world. So that's part of why I came here today. And last, member collaboration. So as much as Stellar is a ledger, it's also very much a marketplace. You can certainly think of something like payments as being a use case where you may want to have a lot of interaction between your different network users. So it's really important for us that we think about how we connect companies building on Stellar to other companies building on Stellar so that there's a lot of asset discovery. So that's something the foundation supports. All right, so a new global transaction ledger. It's really what we're focused on at Stellar. How do we make it so that financial transactions can move more quickly, we can have more efficient markets, and we can essentially eliminate a lot of the costs that we see around financial transactions today. So just to give a little bit of preview, I'm going to first outline a couple of the, I would say, high-level features or capabilities of Stellar, and then I'm going to dig into a couple core concepts around how Stellar works. But so to start, Stellar is a multi-asset ledger. Stellar Lumens are a native asset. They're the only asset in the Stellar network that you don't need permission to hold or to send. Anybody, any account inside of Stellar can hold Lumens and transact with them. However, there's close to 4,000 other assets that have been issued in the Stellar network and that are live today. And I'll talk about what some of those different assets look like, but I think a really fundamental thing to understand about Stellar is that we have many, many different types of digital tokens or financial assets that are being issued and traded inside of the network. 2, Stellar is pretty fast. Our transactions settle in 3 to 5 seconds. Of course, that's a reflection of our consensus protocol, but for a public network, This is pretty good. You can settle and settle a transaction in 3 to 5 seconds. Cost. So it's really important that the foundation helps to support Stellar as a low-cost transaction infrastructure. That's really our vision for the platform. So right now you can do about 50,000 transactions inside of Stellar for 1 cent. And the foundation is committed to making sure, or doing our best to ensure, that the ledger maintains that role as being a low-cost transaction environment. Because we're focused on financial transactions, we've also built some software outside of Stellar Core, the ledger itself, to facilitate things like compliance. So we have a compliance server and compliance protocol, which help to transmit KYC details or AML verification between different transactors. Scalability, so Stellar's very scalable in terms of a public ledger. Right now we can do about 1,000 concurrent transactions per second, and of course are doing things to continue to grow that. And last, our validators, from our consensus perspective, we use the Stellar consensus protocol. I'll speak on that in just a minute. But essentially, validators inside of the public network can actually select other validators as their core counterparties. And so it enables a bit more autonomy for validators in the network in terms of who they trust. Okay, so I'm going to talk through 4 kind of key concepts of how Stellar works. If you leave here today and have a better understanding of these concepts, then I've done my job. So the first, and I mentioned this already, Stellar is a multi-asset platform. A first-order function of what you can do on the Stellar ledger is issue a digital asset. So again, back in 2016 when I joined the company, for the most part, what we were talking about were currency assets, because we were really focused on the payments use case. I think the kind of in vogue way of describing this now is stablecoins, but we also just call this anchoring a currency or anchoring a fiat asset. And what that means is that a financial institution, typically a licensed money transfer company or bank, will issue or anchor a currency. And it means that that financial institution is saying that they will trade that currency inside of Stellar, and if it's sent back to them, assuming kind of its regulatory compliant transaction, they will then redeem that asset in the real world. So if I want to send $10 to India, and there's an anchor for rupees, I can purchase that rupee coin, send it back to that anchor, and they'll deposit 10 rupees in India, whether that's in a bank account or in a mobile wallet or picking up cash. And so that's really cool. We know that payments is a kind of slow and expensive process. So it's really great to think about how Stellar can be utilized by financial institutions for doing things like cross-border payments by issuing these digital assets. But that was really just the beginning for us. I would say particularly with the explosion of ICOs in 2017, we started seeing people utilizing Stellar for a lot of different use cases. Issuing an ICO token is quite simple and easy to do inside of the Stellar network. But even that was just the beginning. We've seen a ton of growth and innovation in tokenizing real-world assets. So this can look like a loyalty point for a company. It can look like a game token, an in-game currency. But then we can do a lot of other very cool things. This could be equity in a real estate project. This could be a bond. You could issue debt inside of the Stellar network. And so the important thing to note here is that it's really dependent on the issuer themselves. So we're not eliminating trust, but different institutions can issue or digitize their assets inside of the Stellar ledger and then make them more available to other network users to trade or purchase or buy. So the second core concept of Stellar is that we have a built-in distributed exchange. And so when you think about it, this is really important. If you have a multi-asset ledger and you have many different types of tokens that exist, it's important you have an easy way to trade them. For cross-border payments, this is essential. I have $1, I want a rupee, so I need an ability to transact in ledger. And this is a really powerful feature of Stellar. So next we have Lumens. So Lumens are the native asset of Stellar. And I think that when you understand these first two concepts, you can also really start to understand the power of Lumens inside of the ledger. So as a kind of a base feature, Lumens act as a security token. So every transaction in the network requires a very small amount of Lumens. Every account needs a base amount of Lumens. As a public network, this is an important feature to stop us from being spammed. But the secondary function is Lumens act as a bridge currency. So if you have, n to the n number of assets, right? If I've got thousands of assets inside this ledger, and I want to be able to trade an individual asset with many other assets in this marketplace, it's important that I have a bridge currency, right? This is in the payments marketplace, oftentimes what the US dollar is fulfilling, right? So there's not a market to trade every currency in the world. Most of them trade through dollars. And so Lumens provide the same type of valuable function inside of Stellar. What's also great is because they're a cryptocurrency, they can also provide instant and real-time settlement. So if I have $1 and I want to send money to India, I can sell that dollar by a lumen, sell that lumen by a rupee. That transaction is executed atomically, so there's no chance I would be holding lumens in the middle, and it can be done in 3 to 5 seconds. So it becomes very powerful when suddenly you can trade and exchange value between different types of asset classes that may not prior have had formal liquidity in that marketplace. I guess another thing to note here, part of the foundation's mission is to distribute 95% of lumens freely to the world. And so that's something that we do through a number of different mechanisms by helping to fund projects in our community, primarily. And so last we have the Stellar Consensus Protocol. So I mentioned Stellar has it's not proof of work, it's not proof of stake. We have our open consensus protocol that was designed by David Mazieres of Stanford. And the protocol has a couple key features, which I'll talk through. So localized trust, asymptotic security, speed or low latency, and decentralized control. And so what the Stellar Consensus Protocol allows is for us to be a public network with a high level of safety as well as a high level of speed amongst our consensus. We use a federated Byzantine agreement model, and the best way to think about this is as a node or validator in the Stellar network, I have the ability to select a subset of validators, a quorum, you can call this, or kind of my trust network, for whom I rely on to validate transactions occurring in the ledger. So what this means is, if I trust validator A and validator B, and suddenly we have a malicious validator in the network that submits an illegitimate transaction, and validator A accepts it, but validator B doesn't, I'm not going to accept it because I need both validator A and validator B to approve that transaction. And so what this creates is kind of a trust hierarchy or waterfall that's somewhat similar to what we see in the ISP market. There's obviously a lot of depth here, and I would encourage anybody who's interested to look into it more, but that's kind of a basic outline of how it works. So to just understand a little bit more about the architecture of Stellar, Stellar Core, which is what runs the validator software, which is doing consensus, is separately from Horizon, which is our RESTful API. Most applications are built directly with Horizon. You don't, of course, need to be a validator in order to build on the Stellar network. But what this design does also is it helps to keep the network secure. So if we're making changes or people are programming new applications, they're interacting with Horizon and not actually Stellar Core itself. It also means that you don't need to be a specialized blockchain developer in order to get started on Stellar. We want this to be something that's really accessible to any smart programmer. And so the last thing I'm going to talk about, because this is a question I get pretty frequently, is smart contracts on Stellar. So we're not a Turing-complete blockchain. We don't really have programmable contracts. We like to say that we have simple contracts. So we have a set of core operations pre-built that you can use to do, I would say, about 85% of the contracts that people generally want to do. You can have an escrow account, you can have multi-signature accounts, you can do batching of different operations before a transaction is fully executed. So we certainly have a lot of features and capability, and what's great is that these are very plug and play, and they're well tested. So you don't have to worry about implementing a contract that could have kind of bad code in it that exposes some risk to your application or project. All right, so I'm going to start there. Perhaps there's some questions, but I will, I guess, say one more thing. Does anybody have the time? 5:40.
You have 4 minutes or so, but Stellar's a great project. So
yeah, well, I was just going to say, if anybody's interested in getting an invite to claim some Lumens, you can put this link in. I'm going to have it open for 10 minutes. So do it now or forever be at peace. I've mentioned that the foundation distributes Lumens, so part of the way we do that is through direct giveaways. I think this is a great way to get started in the Stellar ecosystem. Claim some Lumens, and then go check out some of the assets or features that are there.
Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Big round of applause then. Well done. Thank you. Thank you.